The war between Russia and Ukraine is the single largest land conflict in continental Europe since September 1st, 1939, when Adolf Hitler, leader of the Nazi German Reich, launched an all-out invasion of Poland, kicking off the war to end all wars, World War II. And yet, today in 2022, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has caused more chaos worldwide in the first 6 months than World War II did in the first year. That's as far as I know, right? But could the war have been avoided? Yes. In all honesty, yes, I believe the war with Ukraine and Russia could have been avoided. But how, you may be asking? You may be wondering? That's what this video is all about. Just ahead, I have 7 creative and somewhat ingenious ideas about how war between Russia and Ukraine could have been avoided. Some of them are a little outrageous, some of them are rather... Oh, what are you doing? Sorry guys, my dog here just can't stay still. You can't stay still, huh? You can't stay still? He's distracting me, sorry. Okay. You done? Okay. Sorry. But yeah, just ahead I have 7 very creative and ingenious ideas about how war with Russia and Ukraine could have been avoided. So let's jump into it. So the first idea I have here about how war between Russia and Ukraine could have been avoided is technically what everyone, all of the NATO allies are still doing now. The United States and NATO allies continue to impose massive sanctions against Russia, but may and will result in massive spikes in the price of petroleum and electric and household appliances that will hurt the common American consumer. Now, the one reason why I suggested the first one, that the United States and NATO allies continue to impose massive sanctions, is because we all know that Russia's economy is not the best. Not saying the US economy is all that great neither. I mean, every economy has its flaws. I mean, inflation is running rampant across the nation right now, and it's probably at 10% or something. That's what the media or the higher powers in Washington want you to believe. But what the US and other NATO allies have proven to Russia that we are willing to hurt ourselves economically so that Russia can struggle even more to continue its invasion of Ukraine and potentially spread its borders across the Baltic states and eventually into Western Europe. But it's an idea, right? But another reason why sanctions from the US and other NATO members continuing with Russia is not that great is because eventually we're going to have to lighten up a little bit, you know, because we get most of our exported petroleum from Russia, imported into the US. Now, the US is self-sufficient in petroleum, but for how long? You know, we could use help from other countries, whether or not they're potentially allies or not really allies, neutral, doesn't matter. But honestly, this first idea of the US and other NATO allies continuing to impose sanctions on Russia, it's only temporary. It's a temporary solution, but later down the line, it would hurt us badly. And my second idea for Russia and Ukraine not going to war is a meeting scheduled and set up between the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the leaders of the Baltic states, and Vladimir Zelensky. And once you have all 3 of those leaders, well, all of those leaders, you know, the Russian president, the Ukrainian president, and the leaders of the Baltic states, once you have them together in, let's say, Kyiv or Moscow or wherever, you would propose to have Ukraine, the Baltic states, and all former Soviet states form an international protectorate free from all influences from the Russian Federation and the United States of America. Now, I'm surprised that nobody even thought of this, and I think this is a good idea only because you have kind of like a buffer zone between the 2 superpowers, right? You have a buffer zone between Russia, the Russian Federation, and NATO. The Baltic states and Ukraine could form the world's biggest buffer zone in a way, because they would be, and also they'd be independent, right? Ukraine and the Baltic states, they would hear advice from the US, but they would also hear advice from Russia. But at the end of the day, they would only be enabling themselves to act on their own will. It's like, okay, if the US has an idea on how the international protectorate made up of Ukraine and the Baltic states could make their economy stronger, but the Russians come in and they give them their idea of how their economy could be stronger based on their point of view, that would, to Washington, they would see that as, okay, they're trying to force themselves upon the protectorate, so we're not trying to do that. But then if the Russians see the Americans come in to the protectorate and they try to offer them their economic viewpoint on how they view themselves, Russia would see that as an act of aggression in a way. I'm not saying this is exactly what would happen. I'm saying that this is a possibility, but that could happen. And it could cause tensions to rise once again between Russia and Ukraine, or Russia and the West, to make things even worse. So in response to tensions, the protectorate led by Ukraine would gather their own people and be like, okay, we have two hyperpowers on each side. They're trying to give us our point of view, but let's see what we can come up with, But I'm spitballing here. So that's just idea number 2, creating a buffer, an international protectorate made up of Ukraine, the Baltic states, and all other former Soviet states, which would be independent from any and all influences from the United States of America, NATO, and the Russian Federation. And now number 3, this one might be a little difficult for you guys to understand, and even I struggled with it. I struggled coming up with this idea and thinking it through, but just bear with me, okay? Number 3 is to allow all Russians within Ukrainian territory to return to Russia, relocate to the United States, or Western Europe. Now, initially, I personally believe that Vladimir Putin is launching an invasion of Ukraine because he, from what I read on the news and from what I read in the paper and online, is that he's trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. Now, we all know that that's not really possible, especially in 2022. I mean, come on, But, like I said, as far as I know. But if he, maybe it's an idea, allow, instead of just invading Ukraine and denazifying Ukraine, why not just send in peacekeepers and dignitaries to the Russian embassy, if there is one in Ukraine, I don't know, and go and just travel around the country, different cities, to where the populations of every city in Ukraine has a decent, maybe at least 50% of the population is Russian. Ask them, well, how do they view their life? Do they want to return to Russia? Do they have family there that they care for, but they really can't afford to take care of them because they live in Ukraine? Or, ask them if they want a better chance at life. Do they want to return to Russia? Do they want to go to a NATO ally in Western Europe? Or do they want to take their chances in the States? And that way, you have your people coming back, but you're not really forcing anybody to come into the Russian realm, like you're not trying to force anyone into coming back to Russia. I know that idea is not really thought through properly, but like I said, it was just an idea I was just coming up with. Now this idea I actually like, and I wonder if you guys may like it too. But if you have any other alternatives as to how Ukraine and Russia could have avoided war, you can just drop it down in the comments, and I'll be sure to check them out and I'll reply when I can. So number 4, the fourth idea into Russia and Ukraine avoiding all-out war is, how about Ukraine is split in half between the Russians and a joint Polish and French government, with bi-monthly check-ins from the United States, right? So hear me out. Russia has always had problems with the United States, and the United States has always had problems with Russia, even on our good days, right? But as far as I know, Russia doesn't really have problems with Poland and France. Now, I understand Russia did liberate Poland when they took it over from Nazi Germany back in 1945. But Russia, or the Soviet Union, if you want to be historically accurate, back then, Russia, they liberated Poland, but they never really gave it its independence, right? So maybe there is a little bit of tension between Poland and Russia, but not as much as there would be between Russia and the US. So what if Poland and France formed a joint government inside of Ukraine, free from any and all influences from the United States, right? And Poland, France, and Russia, they signed a treaty that would break Ukraine in half. Now, unfortunately, it would mean that Ukraine is broken up in half, just as Germany was back in 1945, when Germany was broken up between France, Britain, the U.S., and Russia and the Soviet Union. But instead of multiple, like 5 or 6 international governments involved in one country, you would have just 3: Poland, France, and Russia. Russia takes the eastern half, Poland and France take the western half. Now, I personally believe that it's probably the best idea I came up with so far, only because the Russians could be more lenient towards a joint Polish and French government. Because as far as I can remember, and from what I've read in textbooks in my history class, Poland and France don't have any issues with each other, just as I believe they don't have many problems with Russia. So I believe that could work. Poland and France, they are NATO allies and they are allies of the United States, but the United States would have nothing to do with this, only because, as I said, it's a joint Polish and French government, split down the middle, right? And they would, however, conduct bi-monthly check-ins. They would check in 2 times a month with the U.S. government and other NATO allies, and be like, okay, France and Poland, they would let NATO and the U.S. know what's going on. Is there anything that we need to be concerned with? Like, how's the economy? How are people living their lives? Like, are people happy within the joint occupied zone? The joint governmented zone? And is there anything that we need to keep an eye on in the Russian zone? But then I would say maybe, okay, let's not really spy on the Russians right now, because the Russians would maybe they would take it as an act of aggression, or like we wouldn't want the Russians to spy on us, But I would have to do more in-depth detailing on that, but that's just a general idea. Splitting Ukraine in half between a joint Polish and French government and the Russian government in the east. But I think that's probably the best idea. My 5th idea is granting Russia access to the Black Sea for easier trading and shipping cargo and consumer goods to the United States and Western Europe, in exchange for the withdrawal of all Russian and American troops and armor from the Russian-Ukrainian border. Now, this one might be a winner, because if you look at a realistic map of Russia, right, in the winter, for example, you'll notice that more than 75% of Russia's coastline is in the Arctic, and I'd say maybe 2/3 of the time of the year, out of 90% of the year, right, Russia's coastline is completely encased in ice. It's completely it's total. It's complete. I forgot the word I'm looking for. It's completely blocked up there. No ships, no trucks, no cars, nothing. Right? There's no shipping ports up there. But you have a Russian port in the Black Sea, right? Which currently the Russian Navy is occupying for militaristic reasons. But what if we offered them free open access to the Black Sea? No military, no naval vessels permitted. Only cargo vessels and merchant vessels. Because no matter what it is you're trying to get out of Russia, it's going to be enormously expensive to get it out of there, right? There's no airport, as far as I know, in northern Russia. All the airports in Russia, they're either located in major cities or in slightly more temperate climates, like somewhere near the Russian-Mongolian border or Russian-Chinese border. And it would honestly be a really good. It would be a great thing for the world economically, because why would you want to spend hundreds of thousands or tens of millions of dollars more than what you're accustomed to fly or ship your cargo out of a port in that is encased in ice most of the year or blocked out with snow, when you have a port in the Black Sea just directly to the south? It's surrounded by, yeah, it's surrounded by NATO members, but also it could be surrounded by potential Russian allies. But that, I digress. It's easier to ship out cargo in a temperate or warm or even hot climate than it is to ship something out in an environment where it's minus 50 degrees below zero, the wind is howling, and there's snow blowing all day and all night. And in exchange for that, Russia and the US would pull both of their troops and their armor away from the Russian-Ukrainian border. Not only would it would pretty much wipe out the fears of any investors worrying about, oh, if war breaks out, the price of our goods is gonna skyrocket, the US is gonna impose sanctions, blah, blah, blah. So it would make it easier for everybody. Just give the Russians access to, how am I gonna say this? Enable the Russians to get their stuff, to get their goods out to the world. That's, I'm not gonna lie, some of us, we actually need, we need petroleum. The petroleum, if it's trapped up in the Arctic region of Russia, it's gonna freeze, and then we gotta take time to thaw it out, and we gotta be careful because we have to make sure that as we're thawing it out, the petroleum doesn't ignite and doesn't explode. And if that happens, then there's a transportation problem because there's an explosion in the pipeline and now the oil's leaking. That would it would just send the fears of investors through the roof. But we allow the Russians to send their goods and their petroleum out through a far less dangerous route, such as the Black Sea. And from the Black Sea, they can send their ships into the Mediterranean. They can dock in coastal cities in Italy, southern France, northern Africa, and it could drive up the economies of those areas and those nations as well. So it would be a big win for everybody, including the Americans, because not only are the Russians saving money and time and resources, we are saving just as well. So that is my idea. That's my fifth idea for avoiding conflict between Russia and Ukraine, right? The sixth one is creating a tri-national treaty between the United States, Japan, and Russia. Now that is very interesting because back in 1945, you guys can correct me if you want. This is the first time I'm doing a video like this, but as far as I know, right? Because I know there's gonna be one person in the comments who's gonna be slandering me, hitting me with historical accuracy. I'm just putting it out there. I'm no history buff, but I like history. I like learning about it. And if I'm wrong, please feel free to correct me, okay? But in 1945, the Russians, they were poised to invade Japan, but the invasion, they didn't invade Japan. They invaded Japanese-held Manchuria. And a few days later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed by the United States, and the Russians were scared shitless. They really were. So how about today in 2022, right? We create a tri-national treaty between Japan, the US, and Russia. In exchange for Russia pulling back their armor and their troops, as well as ours, from the border between Russia and Ukraine, we contact the Japanese government, and we have a sit down, and we get the Japanese to relinquish control of the Japanese Kerguelen Islands that are currently being fought over, not physically, but in the courts. Relinquish the Kerguelen Islands from Japan back to Russia. In exchange, why do I say this? Because the Russian Navy and the Russian merchant fleet, they need somewhere to expand to. Now, they could expand into the coastal waters around the Kerguelen Islands, or the Russians can move in once a deal is signed and enforced. They can set up naval bases, or they can set up outposts for merchant ships of the Russian merchant fleet to come dock and offload their cargo. And, Sorry, these cars, with their loud engines just woke up my dogs. Um, but as I was saying, um, the Kerguelen Islands would be a strategic point for Russia as they are for Japan right now. Yes, it would sting for Japan for a little bit, but we would give them joint custody of Taiwan as well. Taiwan would be under the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China. They would be under the Republic of China, but they would also be under direct protection and support from the United States and Japan, right? So Japan would have joint custody of Taiwan and their coastal waters. The U.S. would also have that, but Russia would take the Kerguelen Islands, not for, well, I know I'm all over the place. I'm just trying to get myself together. So if we gave Russia the Kerguelen Islands, there would have to be a compromise. No military presence there, but for merchant and cargo shipping only. So Russia would not only have access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean to offload their cargo in Southern Europe and Northern Africa, but they would have an opportunity to expand their cargo and merchant networks into Alaska, Canada, and the western coast of the U.S. Because think about it, let's face it, putting aside war and military conflict for a second, everybody has the right to make their money. Everybody has a right to expand their financial network, their financial empires, right? Nobody out there, no matter how big you are, no matter how big your military is, no matter how many nuclear weapons you got, nobody has the power to tell you, you cannot, you can't do business here. The United States has no business to tell Russia you can't do business here. The Russians have no right to tell the Americans you can't do business here. So if I were president, I would sit down with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and say, look, we know your economy is hurting. Your economy is hurting badly right now. That's not our fault, though. It's hurting because you had to invade Ukraine. But for all other reasons, I digress. So we would allow you to expand your merchant fleet from the Sea of Okhotsk in eastern Russia, the Pacific Far East. You could set up merchant cargo outposts in the Kerguelen Islands, and you can expand your merchant fleet to ship petroleum and other consumer goods and electronic products and household items from Russia into Alaska, Canada, and the western coast of the U.S. Like I said, it's just a general idea. I have to get more thorough with it. I have to break it down more thoroughly for you guys, but it's just an idea. And the last one is the legalization of Bitcoin, the world's largest and most powerful cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, across the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, right? The Russians don't like that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency for now. And Russia and China, they recently signed a deal that their national currency wouldn't be the ruble or the yuan, the Chinese yuan, or sorry, Chinese yuan, excuse me. Their national currency would be natural resources, metals that the rest of the world needs. And they know what they're doing because last time I checked, Apple, Microsoft, Dell, all of their products, at least 90% of them include gold, silver, and platinum, which can be found in absolute abundance across China and Eastern Russia, right? So in order to top that, why doesn't the United States lead an effort to legalize Bitcoin and legalize it not just in the US, but Russia and Ukraine? That way, all three nations, they have one currency. No dollar, no ruble, none of that. And Bitcoin would be used for everything. Everyday transactions, government transactions, purchases. If we want to, let's say Ukraine wants to purchase, I don't know, an aircraft carrier, right? They want their own aircraft carrier from the US. They want to buy it from us. Instead of paying $3 billion or $10 billion in American dollars, you spend $10 billion in Bitcoin. That way, when the Russians pick up on it, they're like, okay, Ukraine just purchased their own aircraft carrier from the U.S., but they didn't pay in dollars; they paid in Bitcoin, and the Russians can't get mad because hey, we use Bitcoin too. That way, no nation can top the other. The United States can't top Russia. Russia can't overcome the U.S. Ukraine can't overcome the U.S. or Russia. No one nation could be a threat against another if they use the same form of currency. Now, I know that's rather general and not really specific. I would, like I said, with pretty much every other idea on this list, I have to delve into it more, kind of break it down and see how it would work. But overall, those are the 7 ideas that I have for 7 alternative ideas I have for avoiding conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But if I had to pick the most likely one, the most likely solution I would have would be, well, I have 2. Well, actually 3. The 3 most likely solutions I would use for avoiding conflict between Russia and Ukraine would be idea number 2, which would be us having a meeting between the Russian president, the leaders of the Baltic states, and the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, and propose to have an international protectorate made up of Ukraine, the Baltic states, and all other former Soviet states, and they would be completely independent from the US and Russian interference. And number 4, which would be splitting Ukraine in half between the Russians and a joint Polish and French government with bi-monthly check-ins from the US. And the third, actually, pretty much every one of these ideas is pretty good. But overall, that's all I got right now. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. And I know you guys are gonna, I can't really say that, but I know at least one person is gonna do whatever they can to correct me, and I welcome that. I welcome criticism. So I know it's been a while since I uploaded a video, but I've had a lot of personal things going on. But outside of that, that's all I got for you guys. So just stay tuned for the next video. Catch you later.